You go to a restaurant, it's all robots there as well.
There will be a class of restaurant that will never go fully robotic, right? Definitely high-end restaurants, unless they make it an absolute gimmick. And that won't last long because eventually every fast food joint is going to be 100% automated and the aesthetic will be wrong. We'll go through this cycle that we go through with all machines, which is that it'll be really cool and being made by a machine will make it more interesting and that'll be the selling point. And then eventually we'll arrive at the realization, just through association, that super cheap stuff is made using robots. And we'll want stuff that's made by a human. We'll want the human-made coffee. We'll want the human personal assistant. We'll want the human waiter. There's a really interesting problem in lab automation. You can automate the really quantitative stuff, but there's a lot of stuff that happens in a lab where you're like, put this liquid into that liquid, give it a shake until it looks like it's mixed. And that's actually been notoriously hard to automate because you need an intelligent system that can actually just see that it's mixed. And so you look at these reviews for people that work at these companies on Glassdoor, they're like, I'm a PhD in whatever. And I spend all of my time just picking up flasks and going, yep, and then handing it to a robot.
Welcome back, everyone. Today we're going to be talking about single-purpose robots. What we're going to get out of this episode is talking about what single-purpose robots are, why they're important, and I've got about 15 different robots that I'm going to show you guys. So, do you know what single-purpose robots are?
Only because I asked you in preparation for this episode and then you told me. Yeah, so AJ, single-purpose robots are robots that have exactly one purpose, as the name suggests. So like a robot that can make pizza or can add that one part to that one machine on that one assembly line.
Yeah, I'm going to say specific task or limited range of tasks because obviously making a pizza is not just one task. There's throw the pepperoni on, spread the cheese. There's all kinds of different subtasks that are involved. So let's just say a limited range of tasks that it can complete. The reason why I'm excited about this or wanted to talk about this is because I feel like this is way more near term compared to all the other stuff we're talking about sometimes. And if I think about the next 5 years of robotics, it's single-purpose robots that are going to we're going to start seeing in the wild, right? We're going to go to the barista, we're going to see a robot there. We're going to go to restaurants, see robots there. And I can see a lot of investment going into it. So whilst the stuff about AI and AGI and, humanoid robots are cool, I think this is where we're seeing innovation happening right now, where commercially you can buy these things today. And also, I guess in the next 3 to 5 years, we're just going to see this huge ramp up of single purpose robots. And I think it will impact society. I think it'll be the single biggest driver impact on society over the next 3 to 5 years. That's my
big claim.
That's my claim. That's my claim.
Do you consider that a single purpose AI falls into a similar bucket, a single purpose robot, as opposed to a generalized robot that can do many things?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think you're totally right there. That's sort of what we're seeing playing out already, right? So we see single purpose AIs, we use it in our company, right? So we have a customer support AI. We have a content question AI for specifically if you have content questions about the stuff you're learning in our course. We have an AI for summarization. We have an AI for various different things, very specific use cases. Whereas general AI, which it's kind of getting there, that's going to play out over a longer period of time. So this is the same thing with robots. I think that's a really good parallel.
We in our company, we have even, I guess, more fine-grained than that. So when we try to train these AIs to read papers and summarize them for us, we'll have specific AIs that just can understand an image. That's all they can do. It's they can pull out a picture of a chemical and tell you what the chemical formula is. That's the only thing they can do. Or they can look at a table and they can pull out that table as structured CSV. But that's all they can do. And then to read a paper, you ultimately end up having 3 or 4 of these little. Usually there's some variant of an LLM that all have to work together to pull out structured information from this paper. So actually, my previous office had a robot barista, and I must say the coffee was awful. I tried it once and never again.
Wait, why? Cool. Why was it awful? Do you think?
I don't know.
Okay. It's interesting. You worked as a barista, right? I think you said something like that. No?
No,
All right. Well,
never.
I have a summer program where I worked as an intern. Not an intern. I guess I worked as a barista, but it was for my uncle, so he treated me more like an intern. Just kind of was doing very grunt work there. But I did make a lot of coffees, and I did notice that like there was some skill that went into it, but it was also due to like type of beans you got. Like so, if they didn't spend enough money on the beans, if they didn't, um, you know, there wasn't any quality ingredients, like those all those things sort of impact it. Because the actual coffee itself, you just sort of put in the little handle, shove it in the machine, and then it just strips feed coffee through, right? So that doesn't really change all that much.
Wrong. I'm glad you're not making coffee anymore.
All right, well, I'm not a coffee prude. I just made it for the 30 to 50-year-old mums that came after soccer practice and would get the coffee, and I would just, that was it. It was a 19-year-old making coffee for them. I didn't really think about it that much, nor did they have that fine taste when it came to coffee.
Yeah, I was going to say, I can tell that part of my brain really wants to be a serial killer, because these like hyper ASMR like videos of people preparing espressos are just so soothing, and they spray their beans and then they grind them manually, and then they have the little thing that just like whisks them and gets it perfectly flat, and then they have all these different like pull cards. Yeah. And then you like watch people prepping the milk for competitions as well, and they'll like do this very specific kind of preparation for the milk so that it's like extra fatty and extra creamy when it comes out, and it's just great, fantastic, good quality content.
Okay, so what do you think the first single-purpose robot was?
What do you classify as a robot? Like, does it have to be like autonomous in the task that it's doing?
Yeah, I'm just gonna skip to it because I think that you could go many different directions with that question. I'm classifying this as a robot that's pretty much autonomous, apart from the fact that you have to hand crank it for energy purposes, right? So imagine you're a young boy in the 19th century. Your industrial revolution has just come by, and you see a lot of people wearing their rich, loom-made outfits, right? They have these really elegant robes and outfits and stuff like that. And then you didn't grow up poor, but you kind of see that like not many people have access to that stuff, because looming a new material like takes time and effort to make those parchments, to make those artworks, things like that. And so you decide you're going to create an automated loom, and you're going to figure out a way to make the patterns a lot more fine grained and easier to use and access. And so this is what Joseph Marie Jacquard did, and he created the Jacquard weaving system. So let me show you this. It's just crazy to me that someone this early created something this advanced, right? So I'll play the video. So this is the automated loom, and the way the automation works, so there's a bit of a hand crank sort of.
This is a modernized version of it, though, right? Like this wouldn't have been what he had come up with back then. This is like
this is what he made.
Interpretation.
Oh, as in the actual machine? This is a recreation, yes. And this is a miniature version of what he made. But
okay, cool.
What
he made
it's
not actually. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So do you see this little like plates being like shifted left like in a circle over here? Those plates basically have holes in them. And like the old punch card system that were used for computers?
That's where it came from. Yeah.
Yeah. So it came from this, which is wild to me. And so essentially the punch card system tells the machine which threads are going to be put into the loom, and through that it's going to create the design. So you can create an assortment of designs, feed it into the machine, and it'll just create this pattern.
A lot of people consider the loom one of like the OG computers for exactly this reason. And then when we eventually actually started building computers, we reused a lot of these like pre-built things to make them, which is why the punch cards were the same. And so what's really, really interesting is even today you can see remnants of this. So I think the first the biggest looms or whatever were 80 like things wide. So they had 80 slots where you could either have a hole or not that indicated how the pattern was going to progress. And so when we moved into punch card computers, we kept that, and it was still 80 things wide. And then when we had monitors and like readouts for this stuff, it made sense to just have 80 things wide, because that's, each row was only 80 wide anyway. And that has just propagated through. So even modern text editors by default will line wrap at 80 characters. So that,
And it
like,
all
that's
came
just
from
sort
the
of
loom.
like, that's kind of become one of the standards for like, or was for a long time, like that's how big a line should be. And part of the reason for that was that if you like would SSH or like remotely log into computers that didn't have screens and didn't have GUIs and didn't have any of that kind of crap, they could only render 80 wide anyway. So you know that like when you first turn on a computer and you've got that super shitty low resolution text, if you were to count those texts, there would be 80. You could fit 80 of them on the screen. And so when you remotely access machines, that's still sometimes the case. And so people argued for a long time that code should only ever be 80 characters wide, just in case you're viewing it on a remote machine. And yeah, so and then you can see it in file formats today. So there's a file format called the PDB format, which I use probably every day for basically encoding proteins. And so this is the file format for sort of describing a protein. And the standard is exactly 80 characters wide. I like it, yeah, because it's decades old, this format. And so, you still see a lot of loom in modern computing.
That's wild. I love the like yes and, by the way. It was just like I just threw up. I gave you the layup and you just dunked it, which is awesome. I didn't really know that much about it. I was just like, this is cool. This is awesome. And then you talked about the computer side of things, which is really cool. But it's just such a crazy piece of tech for the era that it was in at the time. So yeah, I wanted to pay respects to, Jacquard before we went into single-purpose robots, because this seems like one of the first single-purpose robots, even though it still required a bit of an energy source, essentially.
I really thought you were going to do like automated shoe shiners, like those little things you see in American airports that you just like put your foot in and just like hums away and shines your shoes.
That is an example. I didn't think of that example. I wanted to go through some of the commercial applications that are sort of already existing, and I'll sort of go through these fairly quickly because everyone sort of already knows about things such as the Roomba, right? Which is one of the first commercial applications that was widely popularized, and people started thinking about this concept of single-purpose robots, right? There were probably things before it, but this is where people were like, oh, cool, this is a robot that is doing my vacuuming for me. And then there's a lot of knockoffs. I'm pretty sure we own a knockoff. We don't own the original Roomba. I think most people
Clearly,
in Australia.
I mean, that's such a weird type of branding. If it's not from iRobot, it's not a Roomba. Like, I read that and I sense the butt hurt.
Yeah. Yeah, this is definitely not the one that we have, but our one's pretty good. I think we have a Robo Rock or something like that. Do you have a robot vacuum?
No, I have a maid.
Fair enough. Then we have applications that are very similar to the vacuum, but just like, slight alterations. So in this case, this is a pool cleaner. Very similar tech, right? You're still using vacuums of sorts, and you're having the same sort of detection of the walls and trying to figure out where to go. So, very similar tech.
So we had this thing maybe 15 years ago, 20 years ago, that we called the creepy crawly. And it was like this giant like suction pad that just like crawled around the bottom of the floor and had like this big tube that let it out of the pool. And it was exactly for this. Didn't look nearly as cool as this, but it just randomly
I had a big
around.
pipe, right? And then it would go.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah. You just let it run all the time. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't think about that.
Scary.
That's probably the first iteration of this, essentially. Yeah. Then we go into... There's also window cleaners and things like that, but they sort of fell in the similar category of like, the suctioning on a wall and just sort of cleaning. And I didn't really think they were all that different. You can go into sweepers, so there's more industrial versions of these robots. So this is a sweeper. They also have a bunch of other products.
Is that one driven though? It looks like it's driven. It's got like a wheel.
I don't think so. I'm pretty sure they're all automated. So this is various things that have similar technologies. So scrubber. Where's this one? Scrubber again. Oh, this one might be driven. That's weird.
Yeah, it's like a little Zamboni.
But there's no seat. I don't understand where someone might be sitting.
It also explicitly says autonomous.
The wheel might not be for driving purposes. Maybe if it gets stuck in a corner, you can like kind of turn it out or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, these are all very similar. Then we also get to the robotic lawnmower. In this case, there's several different versions of this. Similar tech to the vacuum. I guess my question to you is like, scrubbers, pool cleaners, window cleaners, vacuum, pool, lawnmower. Do you see anything in that vein using the exact same technology for a different area?
The exact same technology in a different area. Is this a setup?
Which
is
is just
actually
cleaning and then like
this?
detecting where it should go, like essentially, right?
I mean, I could see the same thing. Like, I mean, you do see cars driving on the roads that do this, but they obviously have a driver, and their whole thing is just they just like clean out the gutters and things like this. But I mean, yeah, there's probably endless categories of things that need cleaning on a daily or semi-daily basis that you could make cheaper with a robot. I don't know if skyscraper cleaning would be benefited by this. You'd have to have a pretty
I
sticky
did try
robot.
Googling that. I couldn't find too many skyscraper cleaning tools, although I remember reading about one before. I just couldn't find it through a quick Google search. I was also thinking, like, honestly, at some stage, like, air purification or terraforming a planet, like, you could have robots going around. You could have mining robots that sort of go into the tunnels and mine ore. I think there's a couple of different applications where it's like it needs to clean or cut or like do anything and be autonomous in its sort of driving, but it's very specific. It's not like roads where the rules are quite difficult to maneuver. Like cleaning a room and driving autonomously, the levels of difficulty that goes through is quite big. So
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of use cases between
mines
those.
do use autonomous trucks nowadays for
Okay.
the bulk of their trucking, because it was an incredibly high expense for them because you have to pay people quite a lot of money to ship them out for 6 months where they can't see their family, etc., just to drive a truck day in, day out. But you also have a system where you've got complete control over the roads, complete control over the structure of how the roads are built, everything. So it's like a perfect test bed for automated machinery. Plus the like physical risk and insurance is so high as opposed to a normal road. So they got automated pretty quickly. So I think a lot of what happens in mines these days is actually fairly sophisticated, at least in Australia. I mean,
That makes sense. I don't know much about the driving side of things, but I know the sorting like the sorting thing was actually a really big cost center. So a company I used to work for, Tomra, would sort ore on site to make sure that you're taking less ganj material back because taking 3 truckloads of 75% nothing and 25% ore versus 1 truckload of just ore or like more refined made a lot more sense. So I can totally see how those costs add up, and mining would be one of those sectors where you're really trying to get your costs down, essentially. Makes sense. Let's move on to the barista. So the robotic coffee shop. There's probably a couple out there. The ones I found was Yummy Future, which I think has a sick website. As usual,
yeah,
another
that's dope.
robotics deep tech company
I love
with a
this
sick website. So this is what it looks like. It's a robotic arm that's essentially picking up a cup. I think they're just 3D printing in this case. Yeah, so it's zooming around. It's going to different coffee machines. Here's where I think it's a little bit, not quite amazing, is that it's just going straight to like one of those like coffee, drink machines that's just sort of pouring it out. It's not actually,
just like
brewing
an
the
espresso
coffee.
pod machine.
Yeah, exactly. It's not like a barista bot. It's more like just an espresso machine, and there's just like a robotic arm that goes to it. So I was trying to find more examples of a full barista, and I think there are some out there, but this was interesting. I think this is in the University of Illinois campus itself. So
what the hell? A human had to come in and pour something into that coffee anyway. What is this?
Yeah, I think it's still early stages, but I think barista is one of those areas where it makes so much sense where a robot's going to come in and start automating those things, because They're essentially
Can you explain
predefined
something to me?
instructions.
I This is something that I know to be the case, but I've just never really been able to intuit why. It feels like if you had total control of your environment, right? So the ones that I've seen are usually inside a glass box, so you can't fuck with them, which makes sense. Why wouldn't it be absolutely trivial to design an arm to do what you needed to do the same time every time? Like, why is this actually a hard problem?
So
I know that it is, but why?
let me answer that question with a company. So this is kind of what you're talking about. I found this company that does just robotic arms.
But if you know where everything is, you don't need vision, right? You just know, move 1 meter to the right, reach out 30 centimeters, reach down 5 centimeters, pick the thing up 35 centimeters, move back, move left 3 meters, move, like you can just pre-program it without any notion of sight or even what's going to be there. And it should just work. In like an active barista situation where you've got humans roaming around and whatever, fine, because people will move shit. But if you're isolated in a glass box and you get to pick where everything is going to be, like, you don't need to see shit.
I think that problem's already solved, right? Like, what do you think is the hard part about it? Or like, what's the example that you've seen that has made it seem that people are saying it's hard?
So I've seen like manufacturing examples where they have to like tape things using carbon fiber threads and like at different rotations at different angles, and apparently that's really complicated. Famously, right, Tesla took a long time to figure out how to automate production. But again, you've got a fairly isolated environment. Coffee is just like a microcosm of this. And I guess my point was more that when you look at Yummy Future, it's really shit. Like, it just clicks a button on a espresso machine. It doesn't actually brew the coffee for you in any meaningful way. And I would guess that that's because it's harder to do that. And so they're just kind of taking a shortcut.
It's probably due to the fact that like you still have to account for unforeseen circumstances, or human putting their arm in the machine, or even if it's in a glass box, you still have to account for certain things happening, or you can run into replay issues where it's just like trying to grab the same thing over and over again and get stuck. Like, there might be issues like that may seem like, yes, because it's in a glass box and everything is very deterministic and you know exactly where everything is, it's fine. But maybe it's that factor of safety issue, but you still have to account for things that could go wrong. I'm not sure. Yeah. But on that note, I thought this company was really interesting, which is just making robot arms. So it's focused around object manipulation. So it can see the object, determine how much pressure needs to be put onto the object to pick it up. So you can see it's picking up different things with different friction levels and things like that, which I thought was interesting. And then the other thing was that, it's grasping without any pre-training. So it's been trained on many, many, many different kinds of items, right? It's learning to manipulate the items, like change it, identify the object, and also like move it around, orient it. And I thought this was cool. Like, you can start getting a robot like this and start using it for very specific purposes, because a lot of what we're doing is picking stuff up and manipulating it, right? So
it's so cute looking.
Yeah.
It's so cute.
Yeah,
I really
it looks
like this because
Wally.
There's a really interesting problem in lab automation, where when you look under the hood at lab automation companies, and one of the ways we did this was actually looking at Glassdoor reviews of what employees said about their experience in these automated labs, is that you can automate the really like quantitative stuff. But there's a lot of stuff that happens in a lab where you're like, put this liquid into that liquid, give it a shake until it looks like it's mixed. And that's actually been notoriously hard to automate, because you need an intelligent system that can actually just see that it's mixed. And so, like, you look at these reviews for people that work at these companies on Glassdoor, they're like, I'm a fucking PhD in whatever, and I spend all of my time just picking up like flasks and going, yep, and then handing it to a robot.
Yeah, I think those things are interesting. But surely at some point you can automate those things, right?
Well, this is the kind of step that I think is needed. But this is kind of what I alluded to at the beginning, is that robotics is going to have a heyday over the next 5 to 10 years. I mean, that's a boring timeline, probably 2 to 5 years, because you need the AI to make the robots super useful. Like, we've always been able to strap cameras to a physical arm, but the novelty is being able to use those cameras to understand what it is that you're looking at and make an accurate guess about how tough it is, the texture, what that means for pressure. That's all software. That's all like just intellectual systems. And I think that now that we've seen this boom in generalized intelligence where, okay, we're not at AGI, but we're at definitely much more general types of intelligence. That's why robotics is going to see such a big change. That's not to say that the industry itself hasn't done a lot of work in figuring out how to actually do the mechanical side of things, but you needed both. It's the same with AR and VR, right? You couldn't do augmented reality without really, really sophisticated artificial intelligence that could analyze an environment and understand that environment. They're kind of the same problem.
Yeah. So speaking of which, let's go through some applications which are kind of lame and then some that are really cool. So I've given you 3 levels of a pizza bot, right? Because I was sort of looking at pizza robots because that's something we talked about. And some of the examples I found were kind of lame, and then some of them really cool. So I gave you 3 levels. So the first level, which is here in Australia, so I was like, oh, cool, we have a pizza bot here. And it looks kind of cool from the outside. But then I realized all it's really doing is just grabbing a pizza, putting it in the reheating space, and then shoving it in a box and then sending it out. So you can see that these 2 plates over here is just reheating the pizza that comes from the left through a conveyor belt. It is then put inside of a box. And then given to the customer. So yeah, that's the pizza has just gone into a box and it's being sent out. And so yeah, I was pretty disappointed after the entire thing, but this is what it looks like. So yeah, the pizza's made already. The term pizza bot I felt was misleading and was disappointing in the end.
Yep. Do you know they have pizza vending machines in Singapore? And I'm just terrified of, I don't want to know how they work.
There's this psychological principle. Have you heard of like operational transparency? So when people understand how it works on the inside, they're more likely to trust the system. So there is something going on here where you can actually see the pizza going into the system. One of the famous examples of operational transparency, just a bit of a left field example, is the Shinkansen in Japan.
Oh yeah.
So people used to complain that like they didn't clean it enough, or like it's kind of dirty, and it Japanese people usually clean things to like perfection, right? They're like very very clean cities, and like they take pride in their work. And so one of the things they did was they changed the cleaning to a show. They called it the 7-minute miracle, where between stops the cleaning staff would stand at the front of the train, they would bow, they'd run inside, clean it as quickly as possible, like make a whole show out of it. Then come outside and then bow. And they all wore like, more noticeable uniforms. And what they found was that complaints decreased, even though they didn't change anything, right? And satisfaction of the job increased because the cleaners felt like they got more respect. They loved the uniform. Like they felt like people, respected the job that they did.
That is just fascinating. That is so fascinating. I wonder, but that feels also very cultural. Like, I don't know if that would work like outside Japan.
Maybe not specifically for Shinkansen, but or for trains, but just the concept of when you show people how it works, or like make a show out of it, or make it very transparent, they tend to appreciate it a little bit more. And I can see even in the pizza bot, though it's a reheating system, I've seen the pizza bots that don't have this transparent glass, so you can't really see what's happening. Versus this, where they actually try to make it look quite pretty in terms of how the robot works. Like even the internals look quite nice. Right. Yeah.
Yeah, they understand that there's a gimmick here that they're trying to lean into, and like it's kind of about capturing that gimmick, and people are going to order this because they want to see the robot move. It's like that street performer in the street that you put $1 into their hat because you want to see whatever weird thing it is that they're gonna do in response.
Yeah. So as you know, Australians aren't known for pizza. We should go to other countries. So the next level up, I think this is from the States. I could be wrong. Is the picnic pizza station. So this is obviously looking way more like a robot. Let me try and show you a video. But basically, alrighty. So this is the picnic pizza bot. So you can see it's kind of operates like a 3D machine where it's sort of going like line by line in some sense, right? So it puts the sauce, puts the toppings. But in this case, it's still like, someone has to feed in the pizza and then someone has to put it in the oven. So it's still manual in some respect. It just does the toppings for you, essentially.
I've always
Yeah.
been so curious how much slower these robots are than humans as well. Like, have you seen a human make a pizza? They're just pop, 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 right? Like,
I actually think this
it's
one might be slower than like a human doing it. So yeah, this is
way,
level
way
two.
slower.
Yeah. All right. Well, let me show you level three. I think level three was pretty cool. So then we go to France. This is a French company, and look at the robotic arms.
Oh my
Right.
God.
It just looks cool off the bat. Um, but
Sick
this
website.
robot basically not only does the toppings, but also puts it in the oven as well. I couldn't find a proper video to show, but this is essentially, yeah, you can see the robotic arms. They're putting on the toppings. Okay, you saw a glimpse of it where it basically, put the toppings in and then sort of like slid it into the oven. So yeah, and it's cutting the pizza as well. So it does the entire thing, which I thought was cool. So this is probably my level three when it
That's
comes
way
to pizza
cooler.
bots.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's way cooler.
And look, it's made with Webflow, and they didn't even purchase the Webflow custom domain. They have the
I was actually going to comment on that. Like, this website is insanely intricate and animated, and it's made with Webflow. Like, that feels like it would just be harder than making it in the actual like underlying code.
no. I think Webflow is still easier, but it's just funny to me that they didn't remove the watermark. Like they put all this effort. And it's like one checkbox to just remove the watermark. So clearly, you know, they're focused on the
They're a robotics company, right? They're saving costs everywhere they can.
yeah. All right. So yeah, what are your thoughts on the three levels? You got Pizza Bot from Australia.
So for
Picnic
all
from
three of these levels,
US.
I have the same question, which is the company behind the scenes a robotics company or a pizza company?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think Pizza Bot and Picnic probably built it themselves. It's strange that this has a actual restaurant, but I do think that they made this one. I
Because
could be
that would be
wrong.
a sick way to close like an actual hardcore robotics deal, right? It's like, let's have a business conversation eating delicious pizza right next to this crazy robot that we built. Like, you start a pizza shop as almost like just a marketing campaign for how awesome your robots are, right? Like all those little videos that Boston Dynamics puts out of their robots doing backflips off walls and stuff. It's like, no way your robot actually needs to do a backflip off a wall. You're doing it because it's like very tangible. Like, you got robots doing stuff that humans can't do in that case. This feels something like this one feels very much like they're actually a robotics company, and that the pizza is just an interesting, maybe it's even actually just revenue for them, right? But Pizza Bot and Pizza Picnic, just, I don't know. I don't think you need to be a robotics company to put any of that together.
Yeah, I mean, it could just be a restaurant brand that decided to invest money into the robotic space and sort of work with third-party vendors to like make it happen. Because
Could be.
a lot of companies like Domino's, Subway, McDonald's, they're all starting to invest a lot more money into robotic production, right? So
I agree,
I
but
think
I
this
would
is a
expect to
trend.
see some kind of branding around that, right? Like, brought to you by Domino's. But this seems like a very like bespoke website that doesn't seem to promote like a larger scale pizza joint. I mean, I don't know, maybe Pazzi is huge overseas in Europe.
Well, I guess that's my point, right? I think this might just be a brand that's starting to expand, and or maybe they just started the restaurant, but like they decided to start with the robotics in mind on day one, but they may not have the robotics talent in
Yeah,
house, right?
that's always interesting though, because I've looked into this kind of business model before, where as the business, you aren't also the deep tech behind the business. It's very hard to justify because you don't have a defendable moat. By definition, the company behind this, unless you like requisitioned this specifically from them to build this, and got some kind of exclusive deal, and they're not allowed to make any other pizza robots for other pizza companies, you don't really have a defendable moat. So you put in a lot of money into the early stage capex that maybe isn't going to work, on the chance that it saves you opex. And if it does work, you get an advantage for what, 12 months for the gimmick, and maybe the operational margins being better. Long term, it's hard to justify that. Maybe it makes sense for a pizza joint that might only be around for 2 years, 3 years, whatever. But certainly in the context that I was looking at, we were looking at automated robots as well, but for like greenhouses and farming and things like this. And in like if you aren't the one building it, it was very hard to justify.
I mean, one could argue that, like, I think you sort of touched upon it, but it starts with the gimmick, but then it's just you're just a first mover to saving costs and having operational efficiency, right? So maybe they're just ahead of the trend. But if every company has this, then you just moved a little bit early, and that's fine, right?
Yeah, but that's where I think. I mean, like, don't get me wrong. That's where I think something like Putzi is on the right track, where it's like it's clearly about the pizza, not with the gimmick added. Whereas the other two companies, if I wouldn't eat that pizza. Right, it's pure gimmick, and the gimmick dies very quickly.
Yeah.
So too with
right.
your company.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, totally. I can agree with that. So speaking about the greenhouse or like agriculture side of things, the next one I wanted to show you was harvesting robots, which I think is really interesting. There is actually a real issue that I've seen with other companies. Other startups are sort of solving this space, but there is a labor shortage when it comes to picking fruits and vegetables and things like that. And so,
do you know that to get a visa in Australia, you have to go pick fruit?
Yeah, because we have such a big issue.
Or like a permanent residence, I think, or something. Yeah, because it's such a problem.
Yeah. So I think this is cool because it's an example of, all right, we're not trying to take your jobs, but we do need to have someone doing this, so we may as well make a robot. So this is a strawberry picking robot. I've seen a couple of robots that are picking fruit in different ways, and usually they have focused on a particular crop when they're doing it, which I think is interesting. So in this case, they're focused on strawberries. So one, they have to sort out which strawberries to pick, which is usually based on color and a couple of other things, but you can set those settings individually. And then they have the robotic arm that's clipping the berry. Now, the berry is always clipped at the stem, which I thought makes a lot of sense. So they clipped it and then hold it by the stem, so they never actually touch the fruit, which prevents any damage from hitting it. And yeah, super interesting. Makes a lot of sense.
So actually, like, the reason they focus specifically on strawberries is apparently because this is a much more defendable fruit because it's really freaking hard, because strawberries are hypersensitive. They've got like a very narrow window compared to other fruits which it's meaningful to harvest them. And they are very, very easy to damage.
Yeah. And that was the video playing as you were sort of talking about it. But yeah, super cool thing. I've seen a couple of players though, so it is interesting to see where this all sort of pans out. Like, I at least personally know at least 2 or 3 players. So I'm curious to see who wins, or like, what kind of solutions are there, or is this going to be like a very fragmented market? We just have to see. This one's from Germany. Interesting. The Germans and their engineering, they're always doing cool stuff.
Is that real, or is that just a meme?
What, German engineering?
Yeah.
Well, all I can tell you is that having worked as an intern for an engineering firm a few times, like a few different engineering companies, we usually had a head office in Germany, and anytime we did something interesting, and be like, all right, cool, we'll send it to Germany to do it. And we just sort of did maintenance and more routine stuff, and I didn't feel like we got to do any design work. So maybe it's just like the 2 or 3 companies I worked for tended to have that, but it was just this trend where I said, man, I need to go to Germany. There's something happening there that's not happening in Australia. I haven't actually verified it at mass, just anecdotal evidence for myself.
Okay.
Okay. Next, we are going to... Actually, let's go to this one. Let's go to robotic security. Have you seen anything in the robotic security space?
Not like from a technical side. I did see, I think it was a Boston Dynamic robot actually that Singapore acquired to roam around in public yelling at people during the pandemic, which was pretty like surreal.
That's
just
wild,
like go
right?
around and be like, hey, you're not allowed to be next to each other, like keep moving, and like make sure that you were like adhering to like quarantine and not quarantine, curfew and things like this. It's just like kind of spooky.
Wait, so I didn't realize this was being used in production. That's interesting. So did you see one in person?
I did not personally see one, no.
Okay.
because I never went outside the house because you weren't allowed to. Because if you did, you'd get yelled at by a dog and just gunned down, in the street.
Okay. Well, this is the night scope, which is an interesting name. It's just this big machine that, roams around, has cameras all over itself, microphone, speakers where it can speak to you, and various things like that. Now, one of the things I was trying to figure out is it kept saying that it had physical deterrence. Here, force multiplying physical deterrent on your team. And I was like, what does that mean? I kept reading it over and over again, and it had no details. So I had to go through the YouTube videos to figure out what it meant. I thought it had an arm or had pepper spray or something like that, but it had nothing. It's just the physical size because it looks so big. Yeah.
People are just going to cow-tip these. They're just going to be like, no.
So stupid. You could just push it over. It won't do anything to you. So I was a bit disappointed. I expected a little bit.
It couldn't, though. I mean, imagine the regulatory nightmare that would be putting a taser on this thing.
Man, if you're going to arm all Americans with guns, we can we can give this thing a taser or something, just anything. Anyway, this I was a little bit disappointed by this, but there is security bots out there, which I think is interesting. It makes a lot of sense. There's cameras on them. They can,
I would be so much more threatened by a walking security robot, even if it was identical in all other ways, but it walked on two legs and had two arms, like Boston Dynamics style, because it just looks more scary. And with something that's just on wheels, it's on wheels because it can't walk, because it's fragile, because it doesn't have the capability to walk on two legs, and it just detract any sense of fear around this thing. Whereas when you're actually walking, it's much more natural, it's much more alive, and I think maybe there's something in your brain that just considers it a bit more actually a physical presence that you need to think about.
I can totally see some teenagers going around trying to fuck with it, just pushing 100%. It over.
Dude, we set fire to Waymo cars. Of course we're going to be setting fire to these things.
All right, well, that's that robot. Then we can move to the Starship, which we kind of already talked about a similar tech through the tube system. And I think you might have seen these before. I've definitely seen these before in the past, of these little robots that have these 6 wheels and will deliver objects to you, essentially, right? Parcels.
So cute.
Have you seen them before?
No, I've not seen one. No.
Okay.
I've seen some in hotels that deliver towels and stuff, but they're not these ones.
Yeah, the towel delivering ones generally, the cat one. They have the cat versions as well, right? That's what you're talking about? Or it's a robot and there's trays
they actually look more like the security robot.
Yeah. And then, I know what you're talking about. I've seen them,
but they've got stuff inside.
Yeah. All right. So this is a delivery robot. Not too much to talk about here. I think it's cool, but it's just like a driverless car. Dude, essentially, but miniaturized.
What do you mean? There's so much to talk about here. Most notably, this is going to make life just like a video game where you run around and you smash things and there's loot inside. It's kind of trying to run. It's even got a loot flag on it. Look at it. And then when it's empty, you just break the little flag off so people know not to bother. If I'm ever out of ammo on the streets of America, I'm looking for one of these things. I'm busting it open, and I guarantee you there's going to be a few magazines in there. If I'm lucky, a grenade.
So that's what you want to talk about? You're just there's so much to talk about.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, well, I don't have too
these
much
little bots. You strap on AR as well. Man, you're GTA for real.
I would like to see this come to Sydney or just other areas I've been to. I rarely see this. I'm guessing this is a European thing mostly, which is why we probably haven't seen it that much. No, it doesn't say. Alrighty. Have you seen brick laying robots?
I've seen videos of them and stuff like that, but I've not had the pleasure of seeing one in person.
So I think this was one of the earlier ones that came out, the SAM 100. So, bricklaying robots are fairly straightforward. You just put some, I forgot what the mix is called. I think it's just cement, right? Yeah, put some cement, put on the brick, put the brick down, rinse and repeat until you get to the end of the wall, essentially, and just keep doing it over and over again. So this one I think is fairly straightforward. I think the space that it takes sometimes can be difficult if you're working in smaller areas, but for the most part, it works fairly well. So this is SAM 100, and then there's also the Hadrian X, which is cooler in my opinion, but I think it's still in development. But it's essentially
This is the one that I've seen. Yeah.
it's like a 3D printer for houses essentially, where it's just sort of making the external thing, and it's mobile as well. So yeah, this one seemed more interesting from a technical perspective.
Yeah, you can kind of like reach across a whole construction site and like build stuff, which I think is much more practical at the end of the day.
Yeah,
Can't wait to see one of these in real life. I think that's where you really know things are like kicking into gear, where it's like every time you see a house being built, there's a small chance that it's getting built by one of these things.
I think seeing all of these again, I know I researched it, but seeing all of these just makes me think about what the next 3 to 5 years is going to look like in terms of just walking around. You're going to see, this robot building a house. You're going to see security robots roaming around. You're going to see, harvesting robots, and then you go to a restaurant, it's all robots there as well, and it's just
I think there will be a class of restaurant that will never go fully robotic, right? Because it's all about definitely high-end restaurants, unless, again, they make it an absolute gimmick. And that won't last long because eventually every fast food joint is going to be 100% automated. And, so the aesthetic will be wrong. We'll go through this same cycle that we go through with all machines, which is that it'll be really cool, and being made by a machine will make it more interesting. And that'll be the selling point. And then eventually we'll arrive at the realization, just through association, that super cheap, shitty stuff is made using robots, and we'll want stuff that's made by a human. We'll want the human-made coffee. We'll want the human personal assistant. We'll want the human waiter, because the association is that the cheapest, lowest cost, drive your OPEX to zero, save every single dollar products are the ones that we associate with automation, which is exactly what happened, right? With sort of like machine manufacturing, was that we went through this period where it's like, oh, it's machine engineered, it's like precision, because that was true, because that was the era that ushered it in. These super high quality things that you had to demonstrate they were better, not just cheaper. But then in practice, it just went into making stuff cheap, right? And then we just created that association that cheap shit is made by robots. And then if you're willing to pay a margin on something, you can 2x that margin just by actually putting a human in, and then you charge a premium because it's a human.
Yeah, I never thought about it that way, but I like the way that you framed it, and it makes sense. It's like kind of like how maybe when there's AI videos and AI movies and things like that, you're gonna be like, you know what, I'm gonna go see a play with real people and just watch them actually act it out, and yeah, I can totally see that playing out in the future. All right, so there's a little bit of hope.
Well, I wonder whether it'll be dystopian in the sense that those plays will become super cheap because there's an oversupply of actors and an under demand, or whether they'll just become super premium, right? I would guess the latter.
Yeah, it's only like the top 10% of society that's sort of paying for human enabled things, right? And everyone else.
But there are some things like building a building that I actually probably would want a machine to do, because there's no reason to have the shit version of that robot, right? The gap between the good version and the cheap version is probably not significant. And at the end of the day, you want humans are lazy. Humans cut corners, and a robot doesn't. So I don't know.
Yeah. All right, I've got 3 more for you. I think I'll start with the Da Vinci, which you might have heard of already. Minutes. Right? All right. Well, actually, in that case, let me just go through these 2. So I've got the shit version, which is just a robotic puppy, right? By Sony, which I think is cool, but in terms of practicality and what's it actually going to do, I put it at the level 1. And then the level 2 that I have for you is robotic bees, which I think is awesome. This is still a research project. But the fact they can help with pollination and do the things that bees do.
Oh my God.
We do have a bee issue. I thought it was really cool.
That's so cool.
Yeah, this is the one I want to end with, because I thought it was really interesting.
We absolutely have a bee problem. And part of me is stoked to see something like this. And the other part of me is but I really would like to not lose bees.
So in Spider-Man,
I'm technology is going to save us, but
In the new Spider-Man game, there's actually, because Peter Parker starts like a foundation for doing all this technology stuff, right? And one of the projects they work on is like a bee rescue project where they create like an artificial bee that will kill the natural predators of bees and keep them safe and then join the colonies. I thought that was cool. So
It's pretty cool.
I was thinking of that when I Googled robotic bees, and this is what I found. So it wasn't
Notoriously, those things have backfired, and you end up with like snakes and cane toads everywhere. But that's really cool. That's really, really cool. Hopefully, they don't I mean, you don't want them competing with the the bees, right? Like you don't want a beehive potentially moving into an area and then not being able to because there are robotic bees flying around. But nonetheless, I really like the idea of this.
Yeah.
Oh, the Weiss Institute. Yeah, they do some cool things. They do some really fucking cool things.
Any final thoughts on single-purpose robots before we wrap up?
No, I think you covered a really cool base of these. I mean, there's, you could also go into the super dystopian version with surveillance drones and war machines and things like that, and Andoril, which I think is fascinating in and of itself and will fundamentally change the way that nations interact with each other because suddenly, like, the prospect of war is just a radically different concept. It's not about loss of human life. And I honestly have no idea where that goes. So I think in terms of like changing the face of society, single purpose robots in warfare, massive. And you already saw it you're seeing it in Ukraine, right? Where automated drones dropping grenades on people are just changing the way that we thought war was actually going to be fought. But on the happy side of things, I think, let's make some pizzas and bees.
All right, I'll let you go and I can wrap up from there.
Thanks, man. Catch you later.
All right, see you, man. Bye. All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed that episode on single-purpose robots. Now, this podcast isn't free, as contrary to popular belief. It actually costs you a very small donation of your time and effort, which is just to share this episode and to like and subscribe. That's all you have to do. So if you go to YouTube and click subscribe, or if you go to Spotify and leave us a review, or just share it with a friend, all those things contribute towards paying down that debt because we spend a lot of time and effort to build this podcast, and that's all we really expect. We don't know if you're going to do it, right? This is why we call it the Technocratic Oath. We just hope that you do it, but would really appreciate your help and effort on that. Thanks a lot for listening, and we'll see you next week.